to be, was it not a conflict of interest anyway for you to be at the same time, around the same time, to be assisting a Ngapesheya with a tender, even if, according to you, there was a totally different tender and for another municipality? When Ngapesheya was competing for an award within your municipality, in a process where you were going to be one of the adjudicators as the chairperson of the bid adjudication committee, was that not a conflict of interest?
No, it was not, Chair. It had no relationship with the city of Tshwane at all. Further to that, why I'm saying no, I'm just trying to expand on that, Commissioner Comr, is that it had nothing to do with the city of Tshwane, firstly. Secondly, I did not look at I did not look at any attachments and conducted a physical assessment of what was there. I just looked at the raw document and provided advice on a key area, which is not done. You just forget about that. So there was no conflict of interest, firstly, because of those two reasons. Secondly, as a result of this tender that was already open. It hadn't closed at that point in time, and I was just giving friendly advice in a similar way where I would get informal legal advice from an attorney. It does not necessarily mean, who is a friend of mine for argument's sake, does not necessarily mean that that is something that I must pay that individual for, firstly, or that is something that I'm binded to. It's simple advice. So it was no harm from my perspective because I was not involved in this tender. It had nothing to do with my employment. I only interacted with raw documentation as well.
For a chief financial officer, that's a very narrow view of a conflict of interest. You, by agreeing to assist, have come to have a relationship with this entity, not just a relationship, but a relationship in terms of which you assist that entity with the preparation of its bid. By preparation, I don't necessarily mean starting from the beginning, but at the point at which that bid was, you were requested to assist to make sure that that bid document was what it ought to be or to have been. And that same entity is participating as a competitor in a bid process which you are going to chair, at the stage of deciding with a view to a recommendation to the municipal manager to recommend whether to award or not to award. It's at the tail end of the process. You basically adjudicate. And you say there is no conflict of interest? In my view, that's a very, very narrow view of what a conflict of interest is.
Chairperson, if I may respond, I think firstly, there's no association between this and the city of Tshwane. That immediately absolved me of any conflict of interest. Besides, I've got no interest, whether financial or of any other sort, whether they receive or they are appointed within that area where I'm assisting in review, in looking at the raw documentation and what the requirements are. I've got no interest in that. I stand not to benefit. I have not been promised any monies. I have not been promised any funds. It's just merely a friend who specializes in these matters to have a look at what's key as per those documents. That's the context roughly on this. Secondly, providing advice when bids are open, it's the nature of my job. It forms part and parcel of that. I try to demonstrate as well that when I made a presentation on GM2 and GM3, even if this was a tender within the city of Tshwane, within the applicable open period, I am allowed to say, this is what you need. To clarify in general terms. This is a matter that was further escalated to the city's war room as a result of items of this nature serving as a red tape, if I might put it as such, where individuals were being disqualified for petty issues which could have easily been avoided had they understood the contents of the requirements of any bids. As long as it's within a particular open period, firstly. Secondly, as long as I don't interact and I provide general advice, which is what I did in this aspect.
This is your friend's brother's company.
Yes.
You assist that company for a bid, which, as you say, was for some other entity, whatever the entity was. So it's something that you have a close or intimate relationship with. You have said you are close friends with Sergeant Nkosi. So this is his brother's company. Based on what you are telling us, you did not even see a need to make a disclosure when the bids were being adjudicated and you were chairing that process. I'm sure, based on how you are responding to me now, you did not even see a need for a disclosure. In fact, I will suggest to you that you basically do not know what a conflict of interest is if you can have as narrow a view as you have, or as you have explained. Now, can you respond in particular to the fact that this is not just any entity, it's an entity belonging to your close friend's brother. You assist with the preparation of a bid. Is that not likely to give the perception, if this were to be known, is it not something that will give the perception that surely he's going to favor this company, even in the bid that he is adjudicating now? It's on that basis that I say that your view of a conflict of interest is very, very narrow. And I do not understand that coming from a chief financial officer. Please respond.
Thank you, Chair. Chairperson, I see where you're coming from, but I must, with due respect, disagree with you. On the basis, firstly, that within the city of Tshwane, there's segregation of duties in terms of the appointment process, and there's no way whatsoever that I can do, Chair, to influence that process. Nothing at all. I demonstrated how that process worked, Chairperson.
There's nothing you can what?
There's nothing I can do to influence. And I have not influenced.
Conflict of interest is not necessarily about the reality of you actually doing something. It also concerns perceptions. Are you saying, as you are sitting there, that you are not aware of that? That conflict of interest only relates to what you may actually have done.
Chair,
Yes.
you gave me a loaded question. I need to respond to all aspects of that. I'm not ignoring everything else that you have raised.
Yes,
I
yes.
will touch on them.
Yes.
But I needed to touch on the most important factors first.
Yes.
And those most important factors, firstly, is I did not influence the process within the appointment of TMPD. I could not influence that process. My virtue at BAC was purely to provide oversight to ensure all compliance matters were adhered to, not to influence, to claim oversight on that.
You see, my question is not about whether, as a matter of fact, you influence the process. That's not where I am. And you heard me, and you heard the lengthy explanation I gave, and you have not addressed that. You choose to address whether you actually influence the process. That's not my question. Can you please answer my question now?
Apologies, Chairperson, I'm getting there. Your load question was extremely
Oh, no,
loaded.
you went quiet, I
No,
thought.
no, I was still
I'm
speaking.
sorry.
I was
Okay,
stopped
okay.
while
Please continue, please continue.
Secondly, Chair, me providing general advice on a bid that's outside the city without any expectation of inducement, payment, or anything of that nature, it can't say I've got a conflict of interest because I'm not interested in that. It's a general way of providing advice. Like I'm also saying, had it been at the city as well, if the prescription process was still open, it's normal to do that. And it's acceptable on a general terms. Secondly, in terms of the conflict of interest, I've got no interest in his brother's company. He's my friend. So, Chairperson, by virtue of people being friends with me, now, for an example, everyone needs to disclose wherever they are because I'm the friend of a CFO of another institution for argument's sake. That's a bit difficult, Chair, because I've got no interest in that. I'm not friends with his brother. I'm his friend. So, conflict of interest and another individual suffering as a result of this friendship would be extremely harsh. I had no interest. I was promised no gratification. Hence, at this point, I can formally confirm and disagree with the notion that I was conflicted. I was not conflicted on two aspects. I did not interact with physical documents. On general terms, looked and advised on a document that doesn't even relate to the city of Tshwane. Whilst this process was closed a long time ago, which relates to the city of Tshwane, I had no involvement or influence on that. Hence, I'm just trying to touch on the most important point that you raised, Chair, so I can have that on record on why I'm saying I respectfully disagree with that notion. I don't have an interest in his brother's company. Maybe it's unfortunate that I'm his friend, but I don't have an interest at that at all. I don't expect to receive anything from him or his brother.
Second, last question. So according to you, the test for conflict of interest is subjective and based on what you think. I did not. So according to you, the test for conflict of interest is purely subjective based on whatever that it is that you actually did or what you thought or what you believed. The test is subjective.
Chair, according to me, conflict of interest is if you are interested in a particular firm, you've got an association with its directors.
Can you please answer directly? Is it subjective? Is the test for conflict of interest purely subjective? Can you please answer the question directly, Mr. Mnisi?
No, Chairperson. Can I explain?
Yes.
My explanation, Chairperson, is that my understanding, the answer is no to your question. A further explanation is that, firstly, conflict of interest is if it's clear from my perspective when I read the documentation that I sign. Do you have an interest in the company or any of its directors? Is there an association of any sort? From my perspective, the answer was no. And it remains no, even at this stage, Chairperson.
Lastly, so basically, and I'm sure the answer is going to be in the affirmative. So from where you are sitting, you saw no need whatsoever to disclose that you had this relationship or interaction with Ngapesheya through Sg Nkosi. You would not even have seen a need to disclose.
No, Chair.
Thank you.
At that page 228, and I think what I want to raise with you is that it's either you're correct or you're truthful that this was a tender for another institution and not for Tshwane, or in fact, it was for Tshwane. And I want to suggest to you that at 228, where you say we need a grade A guards, that suggests that you're speaking for Tshwane, because at that time you are the CFO of Tshwane. So you are speaking, you're telling Sg Nkosi what your employer, what your institution needs. And for me, that is consistent with what you do at page 178, after you are given a list that we find at 177, which has Ngapesheya at item 2, that list where you are to deal with matters in order of priority. And your response to that list, first you say, thanks Mfowethu, I'm on top of this, but more importantly, and this is what I'm raising with you, at 178, right at the top, you say, this is ours, Mfowethu. This is the final list, right? So this is ours, Mfowethu, of a list that contains Ngapesheya. When you read that with 228, where you say we need grade A guards, speaks to a Tshwane tender in which you have an interest, and the interest being that Ngapesheya gets this contract, whether or not you're going to get money or not, your interest is that Ngapesheya gets this tender. So that's the first scenario, and I say to you, that's a more probable picture of what was happening here. The second is what you are saying. The second possibility is, just you can do notes of what I'm putting to you so that you can respond. The second is, you're correct, the possibility is you're correct, this was for another institution, and you were assisting with completing the Ngapesheya documents so that they are successful in that tender with another institution. But that is still problematic for your position because you are promoting or rooting for the commercial success, financial success of Ngapesheya to succeed in that tender. And that must raise a problem for your position in the BAC as the chairperson, because on the one transaction, you clearly want Ngapesheya to succeed with another institution if we believe and accept that it was for another institution. Well, when you're a chairperson, we must accept that you still have the same interest and bias towards Ngapesheya that it must succeed, even if you get nothing. So on either scenario, it's not helpful to you. In the one, it's an outright case of an illegality, in fact. In the one, where you are participating in the corruption of a tender process that is already underway at Tshwane. The alternative is you're promoting the financial interests of Ngapesheya in another institution, and that should have disqualified you to sit as a BAC chair in Tshwane 1, or in fact, you should have declared. You may comment if you want to.
Thank you, Commissioner. With your permission, I would really like to comment on that. And commenting, I want to start on the first scenario that you gave. The first scenario that you gave, you mentioned that this is probable that this was for a City of Tshwane tender, and I'd probably say for TMPD 1. So I'm going to request us to do that same exercise and to test whether grade A guards were necessary for TMPD 1. This will, in some way or form, try and deal with this aspect conclusively now. So you look at the same annexes that I provided on GM 13. On GM 13, I want to refer you to two places. The second bundle of my own submissions. In the message, it was clear that the requirement for that bid was grade A. If you look at page 156 of the second bundle, page 156 of the second bundle, right at the bottom, personnel per region, security personnel, 2 grade B or higher, meaning grade B is sufficient. Further to that, I want to take you to page number, just 1 minute. I'll take you to the evaluation criteria. There we go. For argument's sake, we could refer to page 212 of my bundle, still, Commissioner Balloon. On my bundle, still page 212, right at the top, to validate that this was grade B and nothing more. So based on that, I would refer to the Commission to this instance and to state on record that there was no relationship whatsoever. So the first situation is completely not there. The first scenario that you have provided, Commissioner Walloy, is completely not existent because this was a requirement for grade B guards. The document that I was assessing was purely for grade A. So on those grounds, there's no relation whatsoever to that. And we can't, with all due respect, link that to 177 and 178. It's completely not related.
Just ask you a question for clarification. In that page 212,
Yes.
there is a grade B supervisor.
Yes.
And there's a grade C
Yes.
guard.
Yes.
And your certificate here is a grade B, the one that you were discussing with Commissioner Khumalo. So what is the relationship here?
So grade A.
Specifically, I'm asking B and C because
Okay.
you are referring us to 212
Yes.
as evidence to show
Yes.
that, in fact, the requirement of TMPD 1 was not A.
Yes.
And what do I see in 212?
What you see in 212 is firstly that you needed grade B or higher. So grade B was the highest that you needed. If you had grade A, it's just a plus. It's not going to score you any additional points. Grade C was the lower level guards. So in terms of hierarchy, there's grade A, B, and C guards. A is presumably the highest level, from my understanding. For this tender TMPD 1, they needed only grade B and grade C. And Ngapashia, by virtue of having grade B as their director, they had grade C in terms of all other guards. So now I'm going to move over to the second scenario that you're bringing on board. And I will agree with you. I'm here to the commission to present a true circumstance of what occurred. And this is what happened. This was for another institution, purely for another institution, where they had asked me for general advice, taking into account that I am a CFO and I specialize with issues of this nature. General advice did not interact physically with documents. That particular tender was still open. I gave that advice subsequent to having a look at the critical documents that were there. Chair, I did not actively want them to succeed. I just played my role to give general advice. With the evidence that we have in front of us in the communications, I did not actively want them to succeed. I was not interested in that. I was just interested in my role of giving advice as requested by a friend. I did not actively want them to win in this tender whatsoever. That was up to them in terms of what document they put in place which leads them to be successful.
And what did you know about General Dlamini's involvement with this tender on the second scenario? I mean,
So-
why are you redirecting them to General Dlamini? This has nothing to do with Tshwane.
Yes. So at this point I knew that General Dlamini and Sg Nkosi were very close. So I didn't want to take this matter any further. And I said, if you want any further advice, please speak to US. He also knows a lot about issues of this nature.
No. That's not what your message says. Your message says he must speak to, Dlamini must tell him to make a correction. So
Yes.
you knew that Dlamini is intimately involved. Otherwise, you would not have referenced Dlamini. You would have simply said to Nkosi, if this was a matter between you and Nkosi, you would have said to Nkosi, tell Begi to make that correction. You say, Dlamini must tell him to make the correction. So you know that General Dlamini is involved with whatever's going on.
Commissioner, I knew that they were close, hence I
No.
referred him to him.
Okay, all right, that's your answer.
Can I just clarify my understanding of how you explain these texts? That first one, Ngapashia is grade B and has nothing in the document.